So I inherited a budget hole which has grown steadily. From up to $325 million, and on top of a staggering $12 million plus of debt. I also inherited a returned cast of councillors, quite a lot of them, in fact, not particularly financially literate, and with a severe aversion to making difficult and unpopular choices. Many of whom have been there while the Auckland Council continued to borrow its way every year out of a difficult problem into a much bigger problem. COVID didn't create the mess we're in, and nor did I. It was a consistent, irresponsible habit of living beyond their means, decision-making and avoidance at the governing body. And unfortunately, he's now caught up with us. All last year I spoke about the upcoming dangers of rising inflation and rising interest rates. And certain sectors of the media actually didn't want to report that. They thought I was making it up. But I was right. And many households at the moment are struggling. They can't afford steep rate rises as they face increased costs on their mortgages. Even the government has noticed that there's a cost of living crisis. So I'm going ahead with my mayoral proposal. This has been a tough budget. As I say, I don't have the opportunity, like the Minister of Finance, of just printing more money and doing a budget without consultation. We've had to consult. We've spent a lot of money on consultation, and we've heard messages, and quite a lot of the messages haven't been heard by the local bodies, the local boards within those areas. Only 4% of people out there wanted to increase rates, but I've got councillors demanding rate increases. I've got local boards refusing any of the cuts, knowing that you can't have one without the other. There's a song which some of my councillors, including the former Minister of Transport himself here, called "Everyone Wants to Go to Heaven, but No One Wants to Die." That's what this consultation's about. So my proposal more or less still stands basically as it started, changed a bit by having listened to the consultation. And yesterday, my final proposal was wrestled with by councillors at a governing workshop. And in it, we had the 4 levers which you would have seen. Reducing costs, which is cutting within our organisations, and I have to thank the CCOs, leaders of whom are present here today, who've all managed to find some savings here and there. The staff, the council itself has found some savings. Not enough, but we haven't been in here long enough to go through things line by line. There's still an awful lot of managers at various levels in there. But of those 4 levers, they all have a part to play. If you don't do one, you have to... Hello, they've all come back in again. It's called competition. So we have to, as I say, the cuts were with internal ones, and there were some cuts we offered or raised or presented with regard to the provision of services which the public like. And it was quite clear that they weren't mad about the cuts to arts and culture, and we heard that, but it did make them think about the fact that it has to all be paid for. We have debt as one of the options, and I think most people realise that that's been used far too often as the lever in the past. Debt against capital projects which earn a return or provide a service has a place. Debt to just prop up the fact that you're not living within your means is most unwise and unhelpful. And right across particular parts of Auckland, particularly in the south, there are people who have taken that soft option and bitterly regretting it. Within the four levers, we did propose the sale of the airport shares. Why I went to that was one of the most memorable of my 5 policies was stopping wasting money. Owning $2 billion worth of shares which are entirely funded by debt and incur $100 million a year of interest costs in the hope of returning something or other, which is nothing the last 3 years and is most unlikely to be as much as $30 million in the next years. And for those of you who are financially struggling, 100 is a bigger number than 30, just in case. But to send out $100 million in interest in the hope of getting 30 back is a waste of money. And so I propose in my budget that for the full sale of the 18% shareholding in the Auckland International Airport, currently valued at around $2.3 billion. I'm also proposing that the rates will be still low at 6.7%. Anything higher than inflation would place an undue burden on households. Whilst 6.7% still is a nasty sum in my view, it will be the first time that we have matched or been below inflation. Inflation has risen up to meet us. In the past few years, when inflation is low, we still managed to outspend it. As mortgages and utilities go up, Aucklanders have been hit hard at the petrol pump and the supermarket, and I feel sorry for them. It makes me determined to stop wasteful spending across the group. And there's been plenty of it. This organisation itself right here is in very expensive offices, so expensive that Vodafone left. And I expect that we will be out of here within the next 2 or 3 years and moving into the more utilitarian building in which the council is, in which there's a fair bit of space and we can cram in more. Personally, I'd have them in Nissan huts in Huntly, but that's a bit hush. I always said we would listen to what matters most to Aucklanders, and that means we are softening some of the spending cuts. And I recognise there are some arts and culture leaders in the room here, and they have spoken well on behalf of that sector, but they have also understood that that sector has to exhibit some financial responsibility and restraint. I failed to get the museum to realise that the wisdom of charging $5 a head for adults and free for children would get rid of their problems instantly. But they couldn't quite manage to face that. There will be changes there. Despite the fact that we are softening a lot of the cuts and hearing the people from Auckland, there are people here who wanted more severe cuts, and you've got to think about them as well. A lot of my councillors don't like the cuts, and so we have to have something to trade with, which is where the airport sale comes in. In response to the public, the funding for the arts and culture will be restored. Largely, local boards will get their money back, although I've got to thank some of the local boards who made serious efforts to make savings and have started to think about it. Personally, I wouldn't have given this all back, but I've got to trade to get the harder things across. I'd like to thank those boards that made a good effort. Interestingly, the further away from the city the boards get, the better they get as far as that. Franklin and Rodney were very serious about making cuts. The Citizens Advice Bureau's funding will be restored, but under instructions that they've got to start shifting their funding to other sources. Other councils only provides some funding for citizens. If you give away free money, it has an endless demand. Most of what the Citizens Advice Bureau people do, and I admire them for what they do, is actually solving problems for the government. The government has moved its provision of services to digital delivery, which is sensible, but it means there's no shopfront for their problems in Auckland. By their own admission, Citizens Advice Bureau only do 2% of their work about things which are directly associated with the council. I've spoken to the government, and they have to take some responsibility and start paying for the things. People go there because they've got a problem with immigration, they've got a problem with the Justice Department, they've got a problem with marriage guidance, for goodness sake. I didn't expect that was my rates for covering. So while I loathe debt and my capacity as mayor, additional borrowing of up to 100 may be necessary just to get us across the line, if we manage to cut the debt by 2 billion by saying. So let me be very clear. The softening of the cuts and the rates at inflation are really contingent upon the full sale of the airport shares, which, as I've said, is the biggest waste of money of the lot. Selling those will save $100 million every year in interest into the future. It's not scaremongering, it's just the best solution that we have. It's the only way to prevent steep rate rises, claw back community funding cuts and pay off our most expensive debt. Our capacity to borrow isn't the issue, it's our capacity to pay it back. Many people have learnt that in their own homes in the last year. But I do want to put a small part of the savings into fixing some things right now. I was elected by 180,000 people to fix Auckland. I didn't realise I'd spend the first 6 months just doing a budget, but a lot of things have happened on those as well. I'll get to that. I'd like to start with some of the funds out of that to make a start on rebalancing local board funding. The local board funding rules, which were set up 12 years ago, were based upon really how much you already had. So the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. And we haven't done anything about that. And so I want to make a start on that. Finish some small things like the Manurua Memorial Park or the Avondale Community Centre for those areas that haven't really got a lot. And I'm hoping that the councillors for those areas will be listening and hear those things. You can't just have those things and then say, we haven't got anything, but we want to pay more rates. I want to refocus AT. I want to wake up some local boards. My own local board here, I live in the city, is a bit guilty of some dumb things as well. They've supported expensive, unnecessary AT road changes at the bottom of Ponsonby Road, and yet we're making no progress on the Ponsonby Park. We've got to reduce debt. We've clocked up $12.3 billion of debt. The interest payments alone are around $500 million a year, or $9 million a week. $20,000 a household. Just to service the ownership of the airport, 27,000 households pay rates just so we can own the airport, to get nothing back. To get us out of this hole and closer to financial sustainability, we've got to reduce debt, and that's why I proposed the sale of the airport shares. And it wouldn't be a short-term sugar hit, but part of a financial reset for longer-term benefits. As I said before, it will reduce our annual interest payments by $100 million a year, every year into the future. Contrary to speculation, we don't just borrow it back again, that would be utter stupidity. I plan to prevent that from happening by lowering council's debt ceiling and introducing a framework of more responsible borrowing and spending as part of a long-term plan in September. The long-term plan will be a shock to the way council do things, from management right through. We'll do zero-based budgeting. We'll set out as if we were running a company, not just historical building upon those who had the ability to scream loudest in the past. Nor will we be flogging the family silver. Auckland Council's 18% share in the airport is mortgaged to the hilt. It's cost us more to hang on than they ever returned or ever will. And as a minority shareholder, we have no seat on the board. The airport is not a strategic asset for the council. It's a strategic asset, but owning some shares in it is not strategic. Technically, it's a poor performing financial investment. We've got significant land holdings adjacent to the airport. We have regulatory powers which we've never really exercised properly, and that would provide a much greater influence over the airport's company's strategic direction than just owning a few shares and perhaps having a director on the board who couldn't do what we're saying, because anyone here who's a director will know that you have to have your responsibility to the company that you're appointed to. You can't just arrive in there and tell all the others what to do. You'll get yourself sued. Positive changes. The budget serves as a wake-up call. It's now been more than 200 days since I was sworn into the Mayor's office, courtesy of the 180,000 Aucklanders who voted for my 5 policies, which I will refresh you for them. And I will go again and again back to those. For those of you who sat through my long period attempting to be elected, I stuck to those 5 policies and I intend to carry them out. Number 1 was fix Auckland's infrastructure, and we are going to finish that city rail link one way or another, and we're going to have to eat some dead rats of some increased costs on that because it's quite a good project, but it was set up very poorly. Too much Wellington influence and not enough business input. Stop wasting money. Well, we've gone on about that. There's some pretty good examples of that. Poor old AT have provided a lot of them. Did you realise we spent $76,000 on walking tours at AT? And the number of people who took those walking tours was 52. I said if we'd offered $1,000 to everybody for a walking tour, we might have got more than 52 actually, but I want them to do less speed bumps above the ground and fix some of the negative speed bumps, commonly known as potholes. I want to get Auckland moving faster, and AT, to be fair to them, have listened and heard a bit. We are working on introducing dynamic lanes. We have connected the transponders which were already on the buses to the traffic lights and doing trials, which to the surprise of everybody, including the people at AT, works very well. And will be introduced progressively across. My recent trip to Busan showed that in 8-lane motorways, there is no idiotic wire down the middle. They have sets of lights and they adjust from 6 lanes into town in the morning and 2 out to the other way around in the afternoon. We'll take back control of our council organisations, and to be fair to them, they are facing up to the changes, and I think those involved, they have delivered cost savings. They are starting to work out there is pressure out there, that the things have changed. I said we'll make the most of our harbour, the port and the environment, and I think those there, the port are starting to work on shrinking their footprint, and they are working on making the place profitable. And I'd like to recognise those that are doing that here too. That's a good start. Wasteful spending is being reined in across the Auckland Council group, and we're finally seeing good cost reductions. Construction of the final phase of the Eastern Busway has started with a bit of prodding from the government. They came up with the money and it's away. Dynamic bus lanes with Waka Kotahi, the utility companies are improving traffic management. There will be relentless pressure. We now have a cone number to ring up and complain about. and we are working to actually charge people to occupy our space just to park the bloody utes. Some of the things that we find in there are insane. The government wish us to move towards more public transport, and I'm right with that. And I recognise some Public Transport Users Association member in the room who are full of good ideas. In order to do that, they're suggesting we raise the cost of parking, which is a good idea, accepting that we don't, as a council, have the ability to set the parking fines. And that's a legislative requirement. So we're working to produce legislation to lift the parking fines, because basically at the moment it's $12 to park for the fine. So even if we put them up to $50 an hour, most people, unless they're completely mad, would just pay the fine. And so you unearth stupidity. Why on earth the people of Auckland can't choose that and have to go to the 80 people, to all those huge numbers of MPs down the line there to tell us, that is beyond me. So our parking fines are the same as in Gore, which has recently become famous for some reason. We are looking at legislative and structural change to help put Aucklanders back in charge. And as I've said, more resources and decision making will go to the local boards, but they've got to do it sensibly. It won't come without some disciplines. Okay, the final vote next week, the annual budget will be put to the governing body to vote on. Right now, I want to address those councillors who intend to oppose it. There are people in this room who signed pledges during the last elections. I've got a copy of that pledge with me. Watson, Walker, Lee, Fletcher. In case they forgot, this is what that pledge said, and I refused to sign this pledge because I figured there was going to be problems with the council. I didn't realise it would be quite so bad financially, but I said I didn't know what was going on. I'm not stupid. The pledge says, I pledge to all Aucklanders I will not vote for any new targeted rates nor any measure that will increase the total average burden of rates, levies and other compulsory council charges above the rate of CPI inflation. Well, if you're signing that, I don't know how you're going to put your hand up and vote against selling the shares. So we know who you are, we named you. I'm expecting you to honour your pledge. You're good people, you're standing up there for the thing. Walker, Watson, Fletcher and Lee. You stood for something or other, act on it. The point is that having explored all the other options, there's only one way to keep rates at inflation, and that involves selling the airport shares. Cuts will come back and rates will rise. Strongly urge all councillors to set aside your ideologies, look at the mess that's in front of you, and do what is necessary to fix this budget hole once and for all. We can support the needs and aspirations of Aucklanders, but only from a sustainable financial position. Public feedback on the airport sales was inconclusive. 2/3 of them are not unhappy about selling all or part of it, but it's up to us. Make some tough decisions because it's the right thing to do. A lot's changed since the draft mayoral proposal was approved for consultation in December, and Aucklanders will thank those councillors later for doing the right thing. And then we can get on with the long-term plan and start setting it up in a way that tackles things. Pretty well come to the end of things now, but there are other issues in here as well. We had the other day a discussion about, I managed to get $2 million out of Jacinda Ardern while she was still the Prime Minister on the basis that we matched funding. And I'm thinking, where do I get $2 million from this empty bucket? And she accepted the fact that the business investment districts, BIDs, a number of those ones, and I am on the one in Otahuhu, or for those as locals, like me and Lowy Otahu, we're on that, and we spend roughly 40% of our annual budget on security patrols. And we went through quite a lot of the BIDs, and I'm a bit critical I've been critical of the pompously known heart of the city, which should be much better called the Auckland CBD Business Association, who didn't spend enough on that. But we did find that they'd spent more than $2 million. That's the matched funding. Council managed to... Well, you had your right of reply and nobody believed you, unfortunately. But I see Sonny Kishal there, who is an advocate, relentless advocate for doing something about crime, and I don't feel good about it. But we did raise that money. But it was quite interesting how the council management tried to squander it with meetings about the bloody stuff. It's to go where it was supposed to be, and I did the deal with Jacinda, and good on her for doing that deal. But I had to remind her because she's buggered off now, and so I was here to take my word for it. Before we finish, just look around. This building is known as the Waterfront Palace, and I know Dean Kimpton at the back there has been appointed at the head of AT, and he knows full well that I'm in his case about cones and costs. AT managed to refurbish these premises at a cost of $11 million and spend $6 million a year in the annual lease. We will enjoy it now because the culture of extravagance and wasteful spending that led to the budget hole of $325 million has come to an end. We could house the entire AT workforce in council-owned buildings, and I expect that they were there before I finish. So if you're the last to leave, turn the lights off. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen. There isn't time for questions. The Mayor has another engagement. So could I just ask for the media to please clear the exit and respectfully allow the Mayor to pass? Thank you.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. To stay up to date with all the latest news from the New Zealand Herald, click the subscribe button below or check out one of the videos here, and head over to nzherald.co.nz for more details on these stories and more.